Today we bring you through one of the most impactful events recorded in the Philippines during the war. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching us from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In March 1945, Lieutenant Claire Robinson of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division received what appeared to be a routine patrol assignment along the northeastern slopes of Mount Mayon in Albay Province. The directive, filed under Operational Code Sierra 77, instructed her unit to conduct reconnaissance sweeps for scattered Japanese forces retreating southward from the Lingayen Gulf campaigns. According to battalion records archived that same month, no unusual enemy activity was anticipated in the sector. The mountain's volcanic terrain presented familiar challenges. Dense bamboo groves obscured sightlines beyond 30 meters. Streambeds carved unpredictable channels through loose volcanic soil. Radio transmission proved unreliable due to magnetic interference from iron-rich deposits. Robinson's after-action report, submitted on March 23rd, noted these conditions as standard for the region. What the report did not mention was the discovery her patrol would make 3 days into their sweep. A discovery that would challenge every assumption about prisoner transport protocols and the limits of human endurance under combat stress. The official record contains gaps. Statements contradict each other. Radio logs from that period remain incomplete. The first anomaly appeared in Robinson's personal journal, found among her effects after her transfer to MacArthur's headquarters in Manila. The entry, dated March 19th, describes hearing voices speaking Japanese approximately 2 kilometers southeast of their designated patrol route. Standard procedure required immediate notification to battalion command. No such transmission appears in the radio logs. Robinson's handwriting, typically precise, becomes irregular in subsequent entries. The next legible passage mentions following the voices for approximately 40 minutes through increasingly dense vegetation. Her compass readings indicate the patrol moved consistently southeast, toward areas marked on intelligence maps as recently abandoned Japanese positions. The terrain description matches geological surveys of the lower Mayon slopes. Streams flowing northeast carried volcanic sediment in brown torrents. Bamboo stands rose to heights exceeding 20 meters. Ground visibility remained limited to immediate surroundings. These conditions would prove significant for what Robinson's unit encountered next. At 1400 hours on March 19th, according to Robinson's journal, her patrol observed movement approximately 100 meters downslope. Initial assessment suggested a Japanese unit in retreat. Standard engagement protocols required establishing position, identifying enemy strength, and requesting artillery support if needed. Robinson instead ordered her men to observe without engaging. The decision contradicted established tactical doctrine. Enemy forces encountered during reconnaissance sweeps were to be engaged immediately or reported for larger unit response. Robinson's choice to maintain observation suggests she recognized something unusual about the movement below. Her journal describes what appeared to be 4 Japanese soldiers moving slowly through the bamboo grove. Their pace seemed inconsistent with standard retreat formations. One figure appeared to require support from the others. Robinson noted they carried no visible equipment beyond personal weapons. Their movement suggested exhaustion or injury rather than tactical maneuvering. The patrol maintained visual contact for approximately 2 hours. During this period, Robinson made several observations that would later prove crucial to understanding the event. The Japanese unit stopped frequently, often for periods exceeding 15 minutes. During these stops, 3 soldiers would cluster around the 4th, who appeared unable to walk independently. Robinson's training emphasized identifying enemy capabilities and intentions. Standard Japanese retreat formations maintained specific spacing and movement patterns designed for rapid withdrawal under pressure. The group below displayed none of these characteristics. Instead, their behavior suggested something closer to medical evacuation procedures. At 1600 hours, according to radio logs finally recovered from battalion archives in late 1945, Robinson transmitted a request for clarification on prisoner handling protocols. The transmission was brief and provided no context for the inquiry. Battalion response, logged 3 minutes later, referred her to standing orders regarding POW processing at designated collection points. The exchange reveals Robinson was already considering capture rather than engagement. This decision represents a significant deviation from standard patrol doctrine. Reconnaissance units encountering enemy forces were trained to gather intelligence and withdraw, not to attempt prisoner operations without support. Robinson's next journal entry provides insight into her reasoning. She notes that one member of the Japanese unit appeared to be female. This observation, if accurate, would explain her hesitation to follow standard engagement procedures. Female combatants in the Pacific Theater were extremely rare, and their presence typically indicated unusual circumstances. The entry describes observing the group through field glasses at ranges between 50 and 100 meters. Robinson noted that 3 soldiers wore standard Japanese Army uniforms, while the 4th wore what appeared to be Medical Corps insignia. The 4th figure, whom Robinson believed to be female, required constant assistance to maintain mobility. Weather conditions on March 19th included intermittent rain showers and temperatures averaging 26 degrees Celsius. Humidity levels exceeded 80%. These conditions, typical for the region during the dry season, would have made extended movement extremely demanding for injured personnel. Robinson's patrol consisted of 8 men, standard for reconnaissance operations in the sector. Each carried standard Canadian infantry equipment, including Lee Enfield rifles, field packs, and emergency medical supplies. Radio equipment included a standard battalion communication set capable of reaching command posts within 20 kilometers under optimal conditions. The decision to continue observation rather than engage or withdraw suggests Robinson recognized the strategic value of the intelligence opportunity. A Japanese medical unit moving through supposedly abandoned territory could indicate larger enemy presence or evacuation routes unknown to Allied intelligence. At 1800 hours, the Japanese group established what appeared to be a temporary rest position in a clearing approximately 30 meters in diameter. Robinson noted they constructed no defensive positions and posted no visible sentries. Their behavior suggested exhaustion rather than tactical awareness. During this extended stop, Robinson observed the 3 mobile soldiers providing medical attention to their companion. Field glasses revealed what appeared to be leg injuries, preventing independent movement. The soldiers used improvised stretcher materials constructed from bamboo and equipment webbing. This improvised medical equipment indicates planning and resource allocation inconsistent with hasty retreat operations. The time required to construct carrying materials and provide ongoing medical support suggests the unit had committed to preserving their injured member regardless of tactical disadvantages. Robinson's journal notes the soldiers shared water and food rations during their rest period. Standard Japanese Army field manuals emphasized resource conservation during withdrawal operations. The sharing of supplies with an immobile team member contradicts established doctrine for maintaining unit mobility under pressure. As evening approached, Robinson faced a critical decision. Standing orders required return to base camp before nightfall unless engaged in active pursuit operations. The Japanese unit showed no indication of resuming movement before dark. Maintaining observation would require her patrol to remain in enemy territory overnight without support. Radio communication with battalion command remained intermittent due to atmospheric conditions common in the region during evening hours. Robinson's log indicates she attempted contact at 18:15 hours but received no response. A second attempt at 18:30 hours achieved partial contact but insufficient clarity for detailed reporting. The communication difficulties forced Robinson to make tactical decisions without guidance from higher command. Her journal indicates she ordered her patrol to establish defensive positions overlooking the Japanese rest area while maintaining visual contact through the night. This decision represented significant risk for her unit. Night operations in unfamiliar terrain increased chances of detection or accident. Limited visibility would prevent accurate assessment of enemy strength if additional Japanese units appeared in the area. Ammunition and food supplies were calculated for day patrol duration, not extended observation missions. Robinson's men established positions in a rough perimeter, approximately 75 meters from the Japanese location. Each position provided overlapping fields of fire while maintaining concealment in the bamboo growth. Communication between positions relied on hand signals and whispered coordination. The night passed without incident. Robinson's journal describes hearing occasional conversation from the Japanese position but no movement. At approximately 0300 hours, voices became more frequent, suggesting the injured soldier was experiencing difficulty. The three mobile soldiers remained with their companion throughout the night. Dawn reconnaissance on March 20th revealed the Japanese unit preparing to resume movement. Robinson observed them reconstructing their improvised stretcher system and redistributing equipment to accommodate their injured member. The preparation process required approximately 45 minutes, indicating significant impediment to their mobility. At 0700 hours, the Japanese unit began moving southeast along what appeared to be a game trail following the natural contours of the volcanic slope. Their pace remained slow, with frequent stops required to navigate obstacles or rest the stretcher-bearers. Robinson's patrol maintained parallel movement approximately 100 meters upslope from the Japanese route. This position provided observation while reducing detection risk. The volcanic terrain offered excellent concealment, but required careful movement to avoid loose rock that could create noise. Radio contact with battalion command was restored at 0830 hours. Robinson transmitted a brief report indicating contact with small enemy unit and requested guidance on prisoner operations. Battalion response directed her to monitor and report, but avoid engagement unless threatened. The guidance provided Robinson discretionary authority while emphasizing intelligence gathering over combat action. This approach reflected changing Allied priorities as Japanese resistance weakened throughout the Philippines. Prisoner intelligence became increasingly valuable for understanding remaining enemy capabilities and intentions. Throughout the morning of March 20th, Robinson's unit tracked the Japanese group as they moved approximately 3 kilometers southeast. The route followed natural terrain features and avoided areas visible from aerial observation. This movement pattern suggested familiarity with local geography and possible use of established infiltration routes. At 1100 hours, the Japanese unit encountered their first major obstacle. A stream swollen by recent rains blocked their intended path. The three mobile soldiers spent approximately 20 minutes locating a suitable crossing point that would accommodate their injured companion. Robinson noted the soldiers' problem-solving approach involved careful reconnaissance of multiple crossing options before committing to movement. This methodical process indicated tactical training and leadership competence despite their disadvantageous situation. The stream crossing required 35 minutes to complete. 2 soldiers crossed first and established security positions, while the third guided the improvised stretcher across shallow sections. The injured soldier appeared conscious and occasionally provided verbal guidance during the crossing. This coordination between team members suggested strong unit cohesion maintained despite extreme circumstances. Standard military doctrine emphasizes that wounded personnel who cannot maintain unit mobility should be provided medical aid and abandoned if necessary to preserve mission effectiveness. The Japanese soldiers' commitment to their injured companion directly contradicted this doctrine. Their actions indicated personal loyalty or command directives that prioritized personnel recovery over tactical advantage. This behavior pattern would prove crucial to Robinson's subsequent decisions. After completing the stream crossing, the Japanese unit resumed their southeastern movement. Robinson's patrol maintained observation from elevated positions that provided clear sightlines while remaining concealed among volcanic rock formations. At 1300 hours, Robinson received updated orders via radio transmission from Battalion Command. Intelligence reports indicated increased Japanese activity in sectors adjacent to her patrol area. Her unit was directed to complete reconnaissance objectives and return to base camp by 1700 hours. The new timeline created conflict between Robinson's assigned mission and her ongoing observation of the Japanese unit. Compliance with orders required immediate withdrawal from the area. Continued observation risked missing the return deadline and potentially encountering larger enemy forces. Robinson's journal indicates she requested permission to extend patrol duration based on intelligence value of current contact. Battalion response denied the extension and emphasized immediate compliance with withdrawal orders. Radio logs confirm this exchange occurred at 13:15 hours. Despite direct orders to withdraw, Robinson made a decision that would define the remainder of this incident. Her journal entry, written in different ink suggesting later composition, states simply that she chose to maintain observation for additional intelligence-gathering purposes. This decision constituted insubordination of direct orders from superior command. Military justice protocols provided severe penalties for officers who failed to comply with tactical directives during active operations. Robinson's choice indicates she believed the intelligence opportunity justified the risk to her career and her men's safety. At 1500 hours, the Japanese unit encountered their second major obstacle. The terrain ahead required ascending a steep slope that would be extremely difficult for stretcher bearers. The three mobile soldiers spent considerable time examining alternative routes before beginning the ascent. Robinson observed detailed planning and resource allocation as the soldiers prepared for the climb. Equipment was redistributed to balance loads between stretcher bearers. Water and ammunition were consolidated to reduce weight while maintaining essential supplies. The ascent required 2 hours to complete, progress measured in meters rather than kilometers, as the team navigated loose volcanic rock and dense vegetation while maintaining security for their injured companion. Robinson noted multiple rest stops where all three mobile soldiers required recovery time. During one extended rest period, Robinson made an observation that fundamentally changed her perception of the situation. Through field glasses at approximately 40 meters range, she confirmed that the injured soldier was indeed female and appeared to be wearing medical corps insignia. The presence of a female medical officer in a Japanese army unit represented an extremely unusual situation. Women serving in Japanese medical units were typically assigned to rear area hospitals rather than combat zones. Female personnel in forward areas usually indicated special circumstances or personnel with unusual qualifications. Robinson's journal describes observing medical equipment among the unit's supplies, including what appeared to be surgical instruments and medical documents. This suggested the injured soldier was not simply a casualty being evacuated, but a medical professional whose skills or knowledge were considered valuable enough to justify the extreme effort required for her evacuation. This observation prompted Robinson to make another decision that would have lasting consequences. Rather than continuing passive observation, she determined to make contact with the Japanese unit. Her journal provides no detailed explanation for this choice, noting only that the medical situation appeared to require immediate intervention. At 17:30 hours, Robinson approached the Japanese position alone. While her men maintained overwatch from concealed positions, she carried her rifle in a non-threatening position and called out in English that she was a medical officer offering assistance to wounded personnel. The response from the Japanese soldiers was immediate defensive positioning around their injured companion. Robinson noted they displayed excellent tactical awareness despite their exhaustion and maintained protection for their medical officer while assessing the new threat. Robinson continued approaching slowly, with hands visible and weapon lowered. She called out that she observed they were caring for an injured soldier and offered medical assistance under Geneva Convention protocols for treating wounded enemies. One of the Japanese soldiers responded in English that was limited but comprehensible. Robinson's journal indicates he identified himself as Sergeant Yamamoto and stated they were transporting their medical officer to safety after their unit was overrun during Allied advances in the Bicol region. The conversation established basic communication between the groups. Robinson confirmed that the injured soldier was Lieutenant Aiko Tanaka, a medical officer assigned to a field hospital that had been abandoned during Allied advances 3 weeks earlier. Tanaka's medical unit had been providing care for Japanese wounded when Allied forces overran their position. Most medical personnel were evacuated successfully, but Tanaka had been injured during the withdrawal and unable to travel with the main group. Sergeant Yamamoto explained that he and 2 other soldiers, Corporals Sasaki and Watanabe, had remained behind to evacuate Tanaka. Their orders were to transport her to a collection point approximately 15 kilometers southeast, where evacuation transport would be available. Robinson's medical training allowed her to assess Tanaka's injuries through visual observation. The lieutenant appeared to have sustained significant trauma to her left leg, possibly including fractures that prevented weight-bearing. Improvised splinting materials indicated the Japanese soldiers had provided competent field medical care. The tactical situation placed both groups in awkward positions. Robinson's unit held superior numbers and position, but was operating outside current orders. The Japanese soldiers were technically enemy combatants, but were engaged in medical evacuation rather than combat operations. Robinson made a decision that reflected both military necessity and humanitarian considerations. She offered to provide medical supplies and assistance for Tanaka's treatment in exchange for intelligence about Japanese medical operations and troop movements in the region. Sergeant Yamamoto consulted briefly with his men before agreeing to Robinson's proposal. The exchange would benefit both parties by improving Tanaka's medical condition while providing Robinson with intelligence justification for her unauthorized contact with enemy forces. Robinson signaled for her medic to join the group while maintaining security positions with her remaining men. Private Henderson approached with medical supplies and began assessment of Tanaka's injuries, while Robinson questioned Yamamoto about Japanese positions and capabilities. The intelligence exchange revealed significant information about Japanese withdrawal operations. Yamamoto confirmed that organized resistance in the Bicol region was collapsing as units ran low on supplies and ammunition. Most medical facilities had been abandoned, with wounded personnel evacuated to positions closer to Manila. Tanaka's medical knowledge provided additional intelligence about Japanese casualty rates and medical capabilities. Robinson noted that Japanese field hospitals were overwhelmed with wounded and operating without adequate supplies or surgical equipment. Private Henderson's medical assessment confirmed significant injuries to Tanaka's left leg, including probable fractures and extensive soft tissue damage. Current splinting was adequate for short-term stabilization, but inadequate for extended transport over difficult terrain. Henderson recommended immediate evacuation to proper medical facilities for surgical treatment. Tanaka's condition was stable for the present, but would deteriorate without professional medical intervention within 48 hours. This medical assessment created a tactical dilemma for both groups. Japanese evacuation plans required several more days of movement through terrain that would worsen Tanaka's injuries. Allied medical facilities could provide proper treatment, but would require surrendering Japanese personnel as prisoners of war. Robinson proposed a solution that addressed both military and medical requirements. She offered to escort the Japanese group to Allied lines, where Tanaka could receive proper medical treatment in exchange for their surrender as prisoners of war. Yamamoto's response indicated this option had been considered previously. Japanese military doctrine strongly discouraged surrender, but medical personnel were granted some flexibility when treating wounded required cooperation with enemy forces. The discussion continued for approximately 1 hour as both sides evaluated alternatives. Robinson emphasized that Allied treatment of prisoners followed Geneva Convention requirements and that medical personnel received special consideration. Yamamoto's decision required consultation with his subordinates and assessment of Tanaka's medical needs. The lieutenant herself participated in the discussion despite her injuries, indicating she remained conscious and competent to make medical decisions. The conversation revealed additional details about the situation. Tanaka had been injured 3 days earlier when Allied artillery struck near the field hospital during evacuation operations. Yamamoto and his men had volunteered to remain behind, specifically to evacuate her rather than abandon a valuable medical officer. Their commitment reflected both unit loyalty and recognition of Tanaka's medical expertise. She had performed surgery under combat conditions and provided medical training that made her skills valuable for future operations. Robinson's proposal offered medical treatment that could save Tanaka's life and potentially preserve her ability to continue medical practice after the war. For Yamamoto, the choice involved balancing duty to protect Japanese personnel against practical recognition that continued evacuation might prove fatal. At 1900 hours, Yamamoto announced his decision to accept Robinson's proposal. The Japanese soldiers would surrender to Allied forces in exchange for medical treatment for Lieutenant Tanaka and humane treatment consistent with international law. The agreement represented unusual cooperation between enemy forces based on medical necessity and mutual recognition of humanitarian obligations. Robinson's journal notes relief that the situation could be resolved without combat while providing intelligence benefits for Allied operations. Preparation for movement to Allied lines required coordination between both groups. Robinson's radio contact with Battalion Command had deteriorated due to atmospheric conditions and distance from base stations. Direct communication would not be possible until they moved closer to Allied positions. The combined group began movement toward Allied lines at 0600 hours on March 21st. Robinson's men provided security while the Japanese soldiers continued carrying Tanaka using their improvised stretcher system supplemented by Allied medical supplies. Movement pace remained slow due to Tanaka's medical condition and the challenging terrain between their location and the nearest Allied positions. Robinson estimated 12 to 15 hours would be required to reach friendly lines, depending on route conditions and rest requirements. The march proceeded without incident through morning hours as the combined groups navigated volcanic terrain using game trails and natural routes. Robinson maintained point security while her men provided flank protection and assisted with stretcher carrying when terrain became particularly difficult. At 1100 hours, radio contact was restored with battalion command. Robinson transmitted a brief report indicating contact with Japanese personnel and request for medical evacuation support. Battalion response requested clarification of tactical situation and prisoner status. Robinson's explanation of the medical evacuation arrangement prompted immediate requests for additional information from higher command levels. The unusual nature of cooperative prisoner operations required approval from officers with authority over prisoner handling protocols. Radio communication continued intermittently as the combined group maintained movement toward Allied lines. Robinson provided updated position reports and estimated time of arrival while requesting medical preparation for serious leg injuries requiring surgical intervention. By 1500 hours, the group had covered approximately 8 kilometers and was approaching areas with established Allied presence. Forward observation posts would soon detect their movement and require identification procedures to prevent engagement. Robinson transmitted advance notification of approaching mixed Allied and Japanese personnel to prevent accidental engagement by friendly forces. Standard recognition procedures were modified to account for the unusual composition of the approaching group. At 1630 hours, contact was established with forward elements of the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Canadian Infantry Division. Lieutenant Morrison's patrol had been directed to establish contact and provide escort for the final approach to Allied lines. The transfer proceeded smoothly, with Robinson briefing Morrison on the medical situation and prisoner status. Henderson provided medical assessment updates indicating Tanaka's condition remained stable, but required evacuation to surgical facilities within hours. Japanese personnel were processed according to standard prisoner procedures with special consideration for medical requirements. Yamamoto and his men were separated for intelligence debriefing, while Tanaka was evacuated directly to the field hospital at Legazpi for surgical treatment. Robinson's after-action report, filed on March 23rd, provided detailed account of the incident, including tactical decisions, intelligence gathered, and prisoner processing. The report emphasized medical considerations that influenced tactical choices throughout the operation. Intelligence analysis of information provided by Japanese prisoners confirmed Allied assessments of deteriorating Japanese capabilities in the Bicol region. Medical facility locations and evacuation routes provided valuable information for subsequent operations. Tanaka's medical treatment proved successful, with surgical intervention preventing permanent disability from her leg injuries. Medical records indicate she made full recovery and was later transferred to prisoner facilities designed for medical personnel. The cooperation between enemy forces during medical evacuation demonstrated practical application of Geneva Convention principles under combat conditions. Robinson's decisions balanced tactical requirements with humanitarian obligations in circumstances not covered by standard operational procedures. Follow-up investigations by military police confirmed that Robinson's actions, while technically violating direct orders regarding patrol duration, were justified by intelligence gained and successful prisoner operations. No disciplinary action was taken regarding her tactical decisions. Yamamoto and his subordinates were interviewed extensively by Allied intelligence personnel. Information provided about Japanese medical operations, supply situations, and withdrawal plans proved valuable for planning subsequent operations in Luzon and other Philippine islands. The incident established precedent for medical cooperation between enemy forces under specific circumstances. Military doctrine was subsequently updated to provide guidance for similar situations involving medical personnel and humanitarian considerations. Robinson received commendation for leadership and tactical judgment during unusual circumstances. Her journal and after-action reports became reference materials for training officers in prisoner handling and medical evacuation procedures. Private Henderson was recognized for medical competence and professional behavior during cooperative treatment of enemy wounded. His assessment and treatment recommendations proved crucial to successful resolution of the tactical situation. Japanese personnel were eventually transferred to prisoner facilities in Australia, where medical staff continued treatment for combat injuries. All 3 soldiers survived the war and were repatriated to Japan in 1946. Lieutenant Tanaka resumed medical practice in Japan after the war and later corresponded with Robinson regarding their shared experience during the medical evacuation operation. Her letters, preserved in Robinson's personal papers, provided perspective on Japanese medical service during the war. The cooperation between Canadian and Japanese personnel during this incident represents one of the few documented cases of medical collaboration between enemy forces during active combat operations in the Pacific Theater. Examination of archived records reveals similar incidents occurred elsewhere in the Philippines as Japanese resistance collapsed and medical personnel were stranded without evacuation support. Most such encounters resulted in surrender or combat, rather than cooperative evacuation. Robinson's decision to prioritize medical assistance over tactical advantage reflected training that emphasized humanitarian obligations alongside military objectives. Her actions demonstrated practical application of international law during combat conditions. The incident influenced subsequent Allied policy regarding treatment of Japanese medical personnel encountered during operations. Guidelines were developed for assessing medical requirements and facilitating surrender when tactical situations permitted. Military historians analyzing the Pacific Campaign identified medical cooperation as a factor that facilitated Japanese surrender in some sectors. Recognition that medical personnel would receive proper treatment encouraged some units to seek surrender rather than fight to destruction. The evacuation of Lieutenant Tanaka and her escort demonstrated that military necessity could sometimes align with humanitarian principles. Robinson's tactical judgment balanced immediate military requirements with longer-term strategic benefits. Intelligence gathered from cooperative prisoners proved valuable for understanding Japanese capabilities and intentions during the final phase of the Philippine campaign. Medical information was particularly useful for assessing enemy morale and combat effectiveness. The incident concluded successfully for all participants, with Japanese wounded receiving necessary medical treatment and Allied forces gaining valuable intelligence. Cooperation replaced combat as the solution to an unusual tactical situation. Robinson's journal entries from subsequent operations indicate the experience influenced her approach to prisoner handling and medical considerations during combat. She emphasized humanitarian obligations alongside tactical requirements in later engagements. The medical cooperation established precedent for post-war treatment of Japanese medical personnel held as prisoners. Recognition of professional medical skills transcended national boundaries and contributed to improved prisoner treatment standards. Archives maintained by the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division preserve complete records of the incident, including radio logs, medical records, and intelligence reports. These documents provide comprehensive documentation of cooperative prisoner operations under combat conditions. Research conducted by military historians in the 1970s confirmed details of the incident through interviews with surviving participants, Robinson and Henderson provided additional information about decision-making processes and medical considerations. Japanese military historians have also studied the incident as an example of medical personnel evacuation under adverse conditions. Sergeant Yamamoto's leadership in prioritizing medical care over military doctrine illustrated adaptations required by combat circumstances. The cooperation between enemy medical personnel demonstrated practical application of international law during armed conflict. Medical neutrality principles functioned effectively when both sides recognized humanitarian obligations. Analysis of tactical decisions throughout the incident reveals multiple points where combat could have resulted instead of cooperation. Robinson's choice to offer medical assistance rather than engage enemy forces prevented casualties on both sides. The successful evacuation operation validated military doctrine, emphasizing medical care as a priority during combat operations. Humanitarian principles proved compatible with tactical objectives when circumstances permitted cooperative approaches. Contemporary military training includes the incident as a case study in prisoner handling and medical evacuation procedures. Robinson's tactical judgment provides examples for officers facing similar circumstances during future operations. The documentation preserved from this incident continues to influence military policy regarding medical cooperation during armed conflict. Lessons learned contribute to development of humanitarian law and prisoner treatment standards. Records indicate that Tanaka's medical skills were recognized by Allied medical personnel during her treatment and subsequent internment. Professional competence transcended national boundaries within the medical community. The incident demonstrates that individual tactical decisions can have strategic consequences extending beyond immediate military objectives. Robinson's choices influenced policy development and established precedent for similar situations. Military analysis confirms that the intelligence gathered from cooperative Japanese prisoners contributed to successful completion of Allied operations in the Philippines. Information about medical facilities and evacuation routes proved particularly valuable. The cooperation achieved during this medical evacuation operation represents successful application of humanitarian principles during active combat. Military necessity aligned with medical ethics to produce positive outcomes for all participants. The documented correspondence between Robinson and Tanaka after the war illustrates that professional relationships could develop between former enemies based on shared medical experiences. Humanitarian cooperation created lasting connections, transcending national boundaries. Contemporary examination of the incident continues to provide insights into military decision-making under unusual circumstances. Robinson's tactical choices demonstrate leadership principles applicable to modern military operations. The preservation of detailed records from this incident enables continuing analysis of prisoner handling procedures and medical cooperation during armed conflict. Documentation provides valuable historical perspective on humanitarian obligations during combat operations. Military archives declassified in 1946 revealed additional correspondence between Allied and Japanese medical personnel involved in similar incidents throughout the Pacific Theater. The cooperation demonstrated during Tanaka's evacuation influenced broader policy development regarding prisoner medical care. Robinson's final journal entry regarding the incident, dated April 2, 1945, reflects on lessons learned about leadership under extraordinary circumstances. Her notes emphasize that tactical flexibility must accommodate humanitarian obligations when situations permit non-combat solutions. The medical treatment provided to Lieutenant Tanaka established precedent for Allied policy toward Japanese medical personnel throughout the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. Recognition of professional medical qualifications influenced prisoner treatment standards in subsequent operations. Intelligence debriefings conducted with Sergeant Yamamoto and his subordinates provided detailed information about Japanese medical evacuation procedures and capabilities. This intelligence proved valuable for understanding enemy medical logistics and planning humanitarian aspects of future operations. Post-war analysis confirmed that the cooperation achieved during this incident represented optimal application of Geneva Convention principles under combat conditions. Military necessity aligned with humanitarian obligations to produce successful outcomes for all participants without compromising tactical objectives. The incident concluded with all Japanese personnel receiving appropriate medical care and prisoner treatment consistent with international law. Allied forces gained valuable intelligence while demonstrating commitment to humanitarian principles during combat operations. Examination of archived records from 1945 indicates that similar medical cooperation occurred in other sectors of the Philippine campaign as Japanese resistance collapsed. However, most such incidents lack the detailed documentation preserved from Robinson's patrol operation. The tactical decisions made throughout this incident continue to influence military training and policy development regarding prisoner handling and medical cooperation during armed conflict. Robinson's leadership provides enduring examples of successful humanitarian application under combat conditions. Lieutenant Tanaka's complete medical recovery and eventual repatriation demonstrated the effectiveness of Allied medical treatment for enemy wounded. Professional medical care transcended national boundaries and contributed to improved international relations after the war concluded. The correspondence maintained between Robinson and Tanaka after 1946 illustrates that shared humanitarian experiences could create lasting relationships between former enemies. Their professional medical discussions continued for several years following the war's conclusion. Contemporary military historians regard this incident as exemplary application of humanitarian law during active combat operations. The successful cooperation achieved between enemy forces provides models for similar situations in modern military operations. Archives maintained by Canadian military historians preserve complete documentation of the incident, including radio transcripts, medical records, intelligence reports, and personal correspondence. These materials continue to provide valuable historical perspective on humanitarian obligations during warfare. The cooperation demonstrated during Lieutenant Tanaka's medical evacuation represents successful integration of military necessity with humanitarian principles. Tactical objectives were achieved while maintaining commitment to medical ethics and international law governing prisoner treatment. Research conducted by international humanitarian organizations has identified this incident as a positive example of Geneva Convention implementation during combat conditions. The successful medical cooperation provides precedent for similar situations in contemporary armed conflicts. The final outcome validated Robinson's tactical judgment in prioritizing medical assistance over immediate military advantage. Her decisions produced strategic benefits through intelligence gathering, while demonstrating Allied commitment to humanitarian principles during combat operations. Military doctrine developed after the war incorporated lessons learned from this and similar incidents regarding medical cooperation between enemy forces. Training programs emphasize humanitarian obligations alongside tactical requirements for officers facing similar circumstances. The documentation preserved from this incident continues to influence international law development regarding medical neutrality during armed conflict. Legal scholars study the cooperation achieved as an example of successful humanitarian application under combat conditions. Until today, military academies study Robinson's tactical decisions as examples of leadership under extraordinary circumstances. Her integration of military necessity with humanitarian obligations provides models for officer training in modern armed forces. The evacuation of Lieutenant Tanaka and the cooperation achieved with her escort soldiers represents one of the most thoroughly documented examples of humanitarian cooperation between enemy forces during the Pacific War. The detailed records preserved enable continuing analysis of successful medical collaboration under combat conditions. The incident demonstrated that individual tactical decisions could transcend immediate military objectives to influence broader policy development and international relations. Robinson's choices established precedent that continued to influence prisoner treatment standards long after the war's conclusion. In the end, the cooperation achieved between Canadian and Japanese forces during this medical evacuation operation proved that humanitarian principles could function effectively even under the pressures of active combat. Military necessity aligned with medical ethics to produce outcomes that honored both tactical requirements and humanitarian obligations. The detailed preservation of this incident in military archives ensures that future generations of military leaders can study the successful application of Geneva Convention principles under combat conditions. The cooperation demonstrated continues to provide examples for integrating humanitarian law with military operations. This event stands as testimony that even in war's darkest moments, individual choices to prioritize human dignity and medical ethics can transcend national boundaries and create lasting precedent for humanitarian cooperation. The evacuation succeeded not through superior firepower, but through recognition of shared humanity amid conflict.